Thank you, Randy, for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak to all of you today, our honored and revered healthcare professionals and teachers. We're so proud to be a part of all the work that you do. We found immense value in the relationship between PTA and AFT as we have addressed multiple challenges and successes together. Randy, the PTA president, Anna King, and I have shared the lead on many education discussions. And your senior leadership, like Marla, are reliable thought partners and, by the way, good friends and colleagues. They're good thought partners as we address the myriad of issues that demand our attention. You all know that the last 2 years of the pandemic have impacted our students, our schools, you as teachers and families. We've dealt with school openings and closings, with masks, with safety for you, our teachers, remote learning, feeding our students, loss of family members to COVID, social isolation, caring for the mental health of our students and families, making sure all of our students had access to broadband, and encouraging our leaders to follow science. And there was lots more. But the pandemic did not happen in isolation. It happened simultaneously with cultural divides. There was the backlash seemed to be embracing after the death of George Floyd and others. There was backwards motion on the support for LGBTQ students and faculty. There were strategic attacks on public education intended to drive away funds from our public schools. There were threats and violence directed at teachers, administrators, and school boards. There was the banning of books and the whitewashing of history. And school shootings. School shootings and community violence took our breath away, reignited fear within us about our loss of control. It brought tears to our eyes, and it stirred up our anger at the inability to get to meaningful change. Each one of those topics could be a speech all by itself. Some of you know PTA better than others. What does PTA look like nationally? As Randy mentioned, we have 24,000 PTAs across the country, 55% of those are Title I schools. Of the 13.7 students we serve, 57% of those are students of color. And our 3.5 million members that Randy mentioned are all committed to advocate for every child with their one voice. Why? Because they know for their child to succeed, the child next to them needs to succeed, the classroom needs to succeed together, and the district, state, and national policies that drive culture and education impact all of our students together. And we believe that the well-being of our students is inextricably linked to their academic performance. My experiences and your lived experience has taught us the full truth of what UN awardee Sherard Sagar once said: "The day I realized I could speak well, I decided I wouldn't speak of myself anymore." We speak for students like Misty Stensley. Misty Stensley's life and childhood was full of misery. Family members who neglected and abused her, always staying one step ahead of the law, always moving when folks would start to catch on to what was going on. Eventually, she was hospitalized for severe sexual abuse. After she entered foster care, she was never adopted. She died at 42. She was a wise and wonderful mentor to me, a woman who taught me so much, but she had this one comment I will never forget. As soon as I learned the meaning of the word precious in second grade, I always wanted to be that to someone. No matter the challenges of the moment, we all know that parents and teachers need to work to address the needs of our students like Misty. So when the rhetoric started that parents' voices need to be heard, our actively engaged members advocating for every aspect of public education wondered, what do you mean you want the parent voice to be heard? Are there only particular parent voices we should hear? Did they only want to hear from parents who did not like the way schools managed the pandemic? You see, some of those parents organically expressed their personal frustration and even anger that school decisions and practices did not match their personal wishes. But outsiders took advantage of that unrest, and false narratives began to emerge. In many communities, the louder voices, the harsher voices, and the most divisive voices did not represent the broad majority of parents. Why? Because the majority of parents, and perhaps the majority of you, don't want to fight, don't want to be in constant elevated conflict. And so the majority sometimes sat by and watched the voices of others create the day. And not hearing their own ideas raised, some grew silent. But that is not a luxury we can afford. This fall, as we return to our schools, all of us have to step back into the gap. As others tried to divide our schools, tried to demonize our education leaders, tried to create narratives uninformed by the reality of public school classroom experience, tried to alter our textbooks, our history lessons, and the contents of our libraries, try to marginalize the other in us, our race, our gender, our ethnicity, our sexual orientation, or our gender identity, we must step up and say no. And they say our teachers and our students must attend and work in communities of schools where there is daily gun violence in the schools and around the schools, and where rampant hate speech abounds. They ask too much. Against such a dark scenario, is there hope for us, for our students, for you, our beloved teachers, and for our schools? There is always hope, but only if we act together to change the narrative and the reality. You might be familiar with that quote from John Lewis, "Never be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble." I like that, but did you ever see the preface to what he said before that? Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or even a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. At PTA, we talk to enough parents to know that we are in the mainstream. We fight for what most parents want. Yes, there are those on the far right and those on the far left who do not like our representation of the very broad middle. One critical group said that PTA was part of the education establishment. What do they mean by that? Well, if they mean that we work closely with teachers, principals, school boards, and superintendents nationally and locally to make sure our priorities are being addressed, then guilty. If they mean we have the ear of the White House, the administration, and members of Congress on all issues relevant to child education and well-being, then yes, we're guilty. We are in the schools every day. Is that what they mean? That we participate in every forum offered parents to advance education and well-being? If that's it, then we're guilty. We choose to meaningfully engage constructively with our partners in education. We are not flamethrowers. Yes, guilty. PTA repeatedly hears my thoughts on this. Anytime people try to pit teachers against students, we know we are in a political battle. Like a mother and father who never totally agree, or in my house, two fathers, We always work together to support the best for our children. And yes, parents disagree, and sometimes parents and teachers disagree. But our polling of parents find that parents think it's essential for families and teachers to work closely together. 89%. They think it is essential for 84% of them think it's essential that we trust each other to help address the pandemic's impact on learning. Critics throwing disdain at our educators is not the answer. We want to collaborate with educators and parents who can identify our very real challenges, but who have workable, evidence-based solutions, not a rhetorical tweet that may get votes come Election Day. In our survey, 68% of parents reported they worry some or a lot about having politicians who are not educators making decisions about what happens in the classroom. When we advocate for public schools, we're speaking for parents. And your polls and our polls and all the others are clear. Let's just look at a few of those. 72% of parents say their school provides excellent or good quality education. 78% endorse the quality and performance of their teachers. 78% of parents express satisfaction with the way their schools handled the pandemic. When it comes to issues like sex education, 71% of voters say that teachers in their local schools are either discussing issues related to sex and sexuality the right amount or not enough. And voters don't like book banning either. 67% of voters oppose efforts to remove books from school libraries. Our research this summer with Learning Heroes tells some similar stories. Of parents polled, 88% support teaching social skills, cooperation, perseverance, and empathy. What do you know that as? Social-emotional learning. 71% believe we should teach the role that race has played in history. 67% believe that we should teach the unequal treatment of different races or ethnicities. And only 14% don't want sex ed taught in schools. Only a third don't want any teaching regarding transgender and non-binary identities. And only 28% would ban all teaching of sexual orientations in our school. But you may be sitting there saying, that doesn't sound like my district. Then it's our job to make sure the broad voice of this broad group of parents who support public education are heard. Look, no parent holds all the wisdom, neither does any one teacher, about how to educate all of our children. The goal is to collaborate with all parents and all educators to find as much common ground as we can to further advance the educational strength of our country. So, how do we be reasonable, unbending advocates in this argumentative and divided world? First, refuse to allow others to divide and conquer. Martin Luther King said it this way: whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Second, control the narrative. Don't allow others to label your opinions. Don't engage on the terms they want to use, like CRT or grooming. Find the simple words that express what you feel and you know to be true, such as, every kid and family needs to be welcomed in our school, or there is no factual history of the United States without fully embracing our successes and our failures. Use your words, use your truth in simple terms. Third, engage everyone, not just who you agree with. Nothing reduces misunderstanding and misinformation like listening to understand. If you, it's so tempting to do this, if you live in a bubble with only the people you agree with, you cannot grow, and you cannot influence the worldview of others. One writer put it this way: I had to unlearn binary thinking, which kept me in a place where I could only put people in good or bad baskets. Don't demonize others. Don't mimic the behavior that you abhor in others. Fourth, surround yourself with a positive, empowered team of leaders who are willing to enter the fray as your partners. Look around you and remember what caused you to come together. AFT's What Kids and Communities Need may be such an example, calling on all of us to do our part to uphold decency and democracy while joining together to build a better life for all. I look forward to hearing more about this new effort to invest in public schools and communities. 17 years ago, I adopted my two kids. They were siblings, just 6 months and 2.5 years old when they came into our lives. And I joined a special club, the Club of Parenthood. And because of those two amazing kids who are now 17 and 19, I will never be the same. The title of Papa is the honorific I most identify with. Remember your own why. And lastly, join us. We would love if every member of AFT was a member of their local PTA, because there's power in numbers. And if the things I've been talking about today are things you believe in, we need your voice with ours. For 125 years, we've been standing shoulder to shoulder with educators, advocating for the best educational and well-being outcomes for all of our children. And hey, I know some parents can be challenging. I've just been told that, I'm not sure. But some teachers might be too. But I want you to remember the families and students who rely on you to partner with them to embrace a better future. We've seen this kind of dedication from parents from all walks of life. Hector Garza from Texas was raised by one such dad. Hector's parents emigrated from Mexico into the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. His dad left home at 4 a.m. each morning for his construction job. His mother worked at the Hager clothing factory. At night, Hector's dad would come home and help Hector with math, Hector's most difficult subject. As Hector matured, one night it occurred to him that there was no way his father could know Algebra 2 with his limited 6th grade education. He asked his dad how he was able to assist him with these math concepts. His father replied, "Son, every night after you go to bed, I stay up for 2 more hours to study so that I'm always just one chapter ahead of you." Yeah. I checked in on Hector, who finished his political science and economics degree. He interned in the law department, and he's now a prosecutor. He also credits his mother, who's provided so much emotional and financial support during those times when these first-generation college students are so tired and want to give up. That's the kind of commitment of a parent that you all know and feel. Many of you are parents out there yourselves, and it matches the level of commitment you have for your students. As we return to schools this fall, are you ready to re-engage? Can our students and families know they can count on you? If they can, please repeat after me. You can count on me. Thank you very much.